Coming to you from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. It's time for the Gardening Simplified podcast, YouTube, and radio show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Well, Stacy, we get to talk today about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Spring ephemerals emerge, bloom, and produce seeds during a narrow window between the snow melt and when the trees leaf out, and then die back by early to midsummer. They're gone. They just kind of hang out the rest of the year out of sight. And there are so many wonderful, we can loosely term them wildflowers, but we're going to call them spring ephemerals. Here today, gone tomorrow, but it's something I look forward to every year.
Honestly, it is one of the most amazing experiences, I think, that people can have. It's like you go into the woods one day and everything is brown, and then you go in the next and everything is green. And it's just one of those blink and you'll miss it kind of moments, and it can be so spectacular. And I think it can be so inspiring for gardeners as well. It's not just about, going out. Now, for me, it is actually going out and seeing how many species I can see, because I do love that. But it's also just about the inspiration and the magic of spring. I just love it.
Perfect description. Magic.
It is magic.
And I also like the way you say everything's brown and then they emerge, because you have oak leaves and beech tree leaves that are on the forest floor. All of a sudden, things like trout lilies and trilliums appear, and it lifts your spirits. And this is a real personal thing for me. Let me share something personally with you, and that is number one. You know me, I do not like winter. I know people have winter festivals. They love skiing. They make snowmen. They have hot chocolate. They love the season. Great. More power to you. I don't like it. I'm always thankful when the month of April comes along. Another personal point, Stacy, is there was a point in my life where I went through a real rough patch. And when we go through a rough patch, we do things to try and cope with that period of time. For me, it was running. And so after work, every night, I would run 10 miles, 5 miles out, 5 miles back on the trail. This trail was lined with marsh marigolds, trilliums, trout lilies, all kinds of these spring ephemerals, and I'll never forget it. As a matter of fact, we have a picture to share on our YouTube video. It just was, like you said, magical for me. It lifted my spirits.
It really does. It's so inspiring. And I think, a lot of people here in Michigan, I know we have listeners from all over the country and in Canada and actually around the world. But here in Southeast or in Michigan in general, you're going to see spring ephemerals if you drive on the highway, whether you like it or not. You will see them. You're driving even on 96 around here and you just see these massive patches of trilliums. But that's not enough. You really do need to get in there. There's so much diversity and there's so many interesting things to see. And, if you drive and you see the trilliums growing by the side of the highway and you think, oh, that's nice, the trilliums are in bloom, you really owe it to yourself to get out there. And it doesn't take a lot. You can go to almost any park around here and see an amazing display. And if you haven't done this before, I would say mark your calendars in the coming weeks to just make sure you get out to a park and see this, because I don't know, it's just, I don't know. It's very meaningful.
Yeah, it is. It's very meaningful, and it's very meaningful for me, so I share that with you. And you're right, Stacy. A lot of us think about trilliums, and that, of course, is an amazing plant. I was reading from the U.S. Forest Service. They were saying there are 43 species of trillium known worldwide, with a startling 38 represented in North America as natives. That's pretty amazing.
I had no idea it was that high.
I didn't either.
That's absolutely incredible. And the rest, this is actually very interesting, and you see this especially when it comes to our spring ephemerals. I'm not going to go deep into this, so don't panic. But there's a phenomenon called the Eastern Asian, Eastern North America floristic disjunction.
Yes,
Were you getting to that?
It's like deja vu. It's incredible. Yes, I have read about it. Arnold Arboretum does a lot of it.
They have an excellent article on that. So basically what it is that the eastern half of North America and Eastern Asia share a very similar number of plant species and genera because at one point they were connected. And so the other trillium species, I'm guessing, are all Asian trilliums. And there are just some spectacular Asian trilliums. Of course, they're not our native trilliums, but they're still special. And you'll see that with a lot of spring ephemerals, the erythronium or trout lily as well, just to name a few. And it's just such an interesting thing to see. And I don't know, I can't believe we have that many trilliums.
Yeah, and
we don't have that many in Michigan.
Yeah. Right. And I have some pictures to share of trout lily, also a favorite of mine, as I would run the trail. And as far as the trilliums are concerned, again, the diversity is amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it the pedicel? Is it a pedicel that the flower sits on? Is that the pronunciation? Yep. Okay. So a pedicel, and then there are others that seem to just sit right on top of the bracts.
Sessile trilliums. Yes. So yeah, sometimes you see the ones that are nodding, the Trillium grandiflorum, which is by far the most widespread one around here in southwestern Michigan. But the sessile ones, they nestle right down into the foliage with no extra stem. Yeah, those are really cool. If you are lucky enough to live in the southeast, or maybe you're taking on the Appalachian Trail or you're going on vacation, you will see the most incredible diversity of trilliums down through the Blue Ridge Mountains and Smokies. I mean,
absolutely.
Really, you want to know another interesting thing about trilliums? So they do grow by seed, obviously. They spread by, their roots as well. But their seeds, their seed pods have these, what's known as an elaiosome on that. And it's a little dot of nutritious oil. And it is like ants just go crazy for it.
Wow.
And it's not just like, oh, here's a nice little elaiosome, guess I'll eat it. It's like they go bananas. And that is how trillium spread. Trillium seed is dispersed, is these ants going after that elaiosome and then carrying it to who knows where. And that is why trilliums are able to spread as widely as they do.
Wow, that is fantastic. Yeah, and if you're keeping score at home and you enjoy the trilliums of spring, as Stacy mentioned then, so it's pedicel and sessile.
Yes.
And the sessile are seated right on those bracts or that foliage. Yeah, pretty cool. Trout lilies, I love them. The solitary nodding yellow flower, they're colony forming, and the foliage looks like trout, a brown trout.
Yeah.
I guess that's where it gets its name.
They look so pretty with the trilliums, and they're so often together. And that, to me, is where, we were talking about Mother Nature and being inspired. I mean, that is a combination that I just find so inspiring. And it's the kind of thing that if you are a gardener and you're out in the woods looking at these things, take a moment to not just go, oh, that's pretty, or oh, that's interesting, but to really think about what is it? Is it the colors? Is it the shape of the leaves?
Exactly.
Is it the gestures of those two plants together? And think about what that means for you combining plants.
Agree, very much so. So I have a question for you based on that, Stacy, and that is, as far as ephemerals are concerned, I also consider non-native minor bulbs like galanthus to be a spring ephemeral. Based on definition, would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I think that's a fair,
it's a stretch.
Right.
But
I think usually when most people say spring ephemerals, they are referring to our native wildflowers, but that they behave the same way.
Exactly.
And most of our spring ephemerals that are native to North America are similar. They have some sort of bulb-like storage organ underground, and that's what they need because they have such a short life cycle that they really need to take all of that energy that they're able to manufacture before the trees come out, making hay while the sun shines, and they need to store that for another whole year before they come out again. So they all have that kind of bulb-like nature. So yeah, I think that's a fair connection.
So we'll talk about them in segment 4 and continue our talk on ephemerals. Before we move to plants on trial, I wrote an ephemeral lyric just for you, Stacey.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Yeah, here we go. We await with much anticipation. They arrive with great adulation. A few moments on stage, our needs to assuage, then exit with short duration. Ephemerals are plants that are temporary. Here's an inside joke in my commentary. They put on a show, they come and go, not a thorn in your side like barberry. I wrote that just
I like it. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, because, as I was saying when in our plants or show on plants that we don't like, I was saying one of the reasons I dislike barberry so much is because when I do go to the woods to see the spring ephemerals and I see a barberry, that makes me real mad.
That's why I wrote it, just for you. Plants on Trial is coming up next, and in segment 4, we'll get into more of these ephemeral plants, list them out for you and why we love them. As a matter of fact, if we were to apply minor bulbs, I know a favorite of yours, Stacy, and mine are the reticulated or Iris reticulata.
Indeed.
Yeah, so an early spring bloomer. Plants on Trial is next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where the order of the day is our beloved spring ephemerals. And if you don't know what we're talking about, in a nutshell, it is the spring wildflowers that pop up in forests all around Michigan, and in fact, around most of the eastern half of the entire country. And again, if you've only ever seen these driving by, seen a beautiful patch of trillium going by at 70 miles an hour, you really owe it to yourself to get out into a park. You don't need to take a long hike, pack a lunch or anything like that. Just find a local park with a good wooded area and you will almost certainly see them. But I did want to mention, since it's Plants on Trial, and Plants on Trial is really all about introducing you to one of the 320 plus proven winners color choice shrubs, and you decide if you're going to add it to your garden. Well, when it comes to spring ephemerals, I do want to say, especially early in the show, that when it comes to adding them to your garden, please, please, please be sure you are getting them from a reputable source. There is a lot of poaching that goes on among spring wildflowers that are dug up, not so much in Michigan, but definitely there's a huge trade from, the Smoky Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains where they grow really, really abundantly. So these are the kind of plants, and I encourage you to add them to your garden. If you have the right conditions, shade, reasonably moist soil, you'll do great with them. But do make sure that you're getting them from a reputable source that hasn't dug them up from the wild without permission. Usually they do need to be seed grown. They tend to be expensive because a trillium takes about 7 to 10 years to flower from a seed. And so usually if someone is, responsibly propagating these plants, it does take quite a while. So they cost a little bit more. And if they're cheap, you should probably be very suspicious about that. There's some tissue culture out there, which does help to defray costs a bit, but please be sure if you want to add these to your garden, you're sticking mostly with native plant nurseries that are sourcing these in a responsible manner. So I want to get that out there. I didn't believe it at first. I was like, yeah, whatever. But every year you see reports of this and people being arrested. And so there's a huge trade for it. And we don't want to be a part of supporting that.
A lot of talk about ramps also.
Oh, yeah, especially ramps. Yeah. So anyway, let's get today's Plant on Trial, which, as we were saying on the break, is one of Rick's favorites.
If you go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, look at our top 10 lists, favorite shrubs, you'll see it there on my list, Stacy.
So it was already there before I picked it as today's Plant on Trial. So, in this theme of spring ephemerals, in the woods, they're understory plants. So they grow sort of through that leaf litter, as we were talking about. And we do have some native shrubs here in Michigan, but mostly it's kind of like you have the understory and then you have the trees. Well, if you go down to the southeast, you will find many more sort of shrubs in the understory. And they make an outstanding companion to a spring ephemeral planting, and especially today's Plant on Trial, which is Legend of the Small, Fothergilla. So Fothergilla is also known as bottlebrush or witch alder. And it is such a great choice for matching with spring ephemerals because it blooms at pretty much the same time. It has these lovely white bottlebrush, as you might have guessed by that common name, flowers. Fragrant, they come out in early spring. And the great thing about the specific variety that we're talking about today, Legend of the Small Fothergilla, is that it is, small. So it's blooming and growing sort of in with the spring ephemerals rather than towering above them. So it's a companion sort of rather than a guardian. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And Stacy, here in Michigan, unfortunately, we often get April snow.
Ah, yes, we do.
And so I have pictures to share of snow coating those flowers when in bloom in early spring. But I love that because you're right. Blooms about the same time as the other ephemerals.
Right. And it's nice that this one, so regular conventional Fothergilla are going to reach anywhere between 4 and 6 feet tall and wide. which is still a very useful size for most residential landscaping. But it's really nice to have a variety like Legend of the Small, which reaches just 2 to 2.5 feet tall, so that you have some different options for how to use it in your garden. And again, kind of letting it accompany the spring ephemerals that are in your garden. Now, this isn't quite native to Michigan. This is really going to be more of a southeastern United States. Again, Blue Ridge Mountains, Smoky Mountains. That is sort of the epicenter for all of this. And that is actually where Legend of the Small was developed, at the North Carolina State University Research Center in Asheville by Dr. Tom Rainey, who has developed a huge diversity of plants in the Proven Winners Color Choice brand, including one of my favorites, El Nino Catalpa. He's been all over the place, developing a lot of interesting natives as well as interesting exotics like that. But this comes from him, and his breeding goal really was to have this smaller size so more of us can use it in new ways in our gardens.
Which makes sense. It's great in a perennial garden.
It is great in a perennial garden, especially this one. So a couple things about growing this wonderful plant. Rick does have it in his garden. I do not. And the reason for that is because it needs moist soil. And I don't water, and I have very, very dry, sandy soil. I have tried to grow it. I'm very sorry to that Fothergilla that I attempted to grow. It did not last long. But like my mom over on the east side of the state in Detroit grows it beautifully, where that soil is more clay-like. So it needs some moisture. This is not going to be one of those drought-tolerant plants that we tell you about. You can kind of just, grow it. But it is a low-maintenance plant, because if you are growing it in the areas, in the kind of environment where it will thrive, because it is so small, doesn't need pruning, doesn't really need much of anything. And that actually reminds me, before I forget, of another reason why it makes such a great companion to spring ephemerals, because not only does it have these wonderful fragrant flowers in early spring, it has amazing fall color.
That's what I was going to say. As a matter of fact, arguably, I grow the plant for the fall color, not the bottle brush blooms in spring. Even though the blooms are so unique, and they're early, and they're fabulous, and I love them, the plant saves the best for last.
It definitely does. And all of those spring ephemerals are long gone by that point.
Exactly.
So if you have a garden bed where you have these plants that disappear, this makes such a great choice, because you'll get that prolonged season of interest. And then, of course, because it's a shrub, it's got those nice persistent branches over winter. But let's get back to growing it. So moist, acidic soil is very important. You're going to want to mulch it. Doesn't really need any pruning or other maintenance. And it's quite deer resistant, actually. Even when I did attempt to grow it, the deer never did actually eat it.
Well, the foliage tends to be kind of rough.
A little hairy
hairy type of foliage. And again, any plant that has that tomentose type of foliage that's kind of hairy, the deer tend to pick something else in the buffet.
And it gets no other pests or diseases.
Right.
Like no leaf spots, no nothing like that. So it is actually an extremely easy plant to grow and to use. And, again, even though it's not native to Michigan, I think it's very much at home here with native ephemerals like this.
And Stacy, for people who are listening to this show on radio, or if you're listening to the podcast version, you're asking us to say again, what is that plant, and how do we spell that plant?
Right.
Because I say Fothergilla, you say
yes.
Fothergilla.
I was gonna mention that. You're not the only person I have heard say Fothergilla, but it is Fothergilla. So Fothergilla. And the reason that it is Fothergilla and not Fothergilla is because it is named after one Dr. Fothergill from England.
There we go.
So So usually what I try to do when I'm pronouncing a plant is to take that root word and use that in the pronunciation. So it's Fothergill, named after Dr. Fothergill, with an A at the end to make it, Latin.
Now it all makes sense to me. That's why I asked the question and brought it up.
But, speaking of spring flowering shrubs, I am breaking my own rule, because as we've said on the show before, Forsythia is named after one Dr. Forsyth. Mm-hmm. But if I go around telling everybody that I love their Forsythia, they're just going to think I'm some kind of maniac. So it is important to be understood. And as long as you're walking out of the store with a plant that you want, It's all good. And you can always go for bottle brush, because most people will probably know, or witch alder, which is, it gets that name not because it's witchy or used in any kind of magical ceremonies, but because it is from the ancient or the old English word wych, which means bent or pliable. And it's also related to witch hazel, so it might also be part of that. So it's in the Hamamelidaceae or witch hazel family.
And I love witch hazel, and witch hazel has very similar fall color to I'm going to say Fothergilla.
I know.
Or
Both habits are hard to break. And I did want to talk about sun. So it does grow in sun to part shade. It will grow in deeper shade, but you're going to see the flowering is very diminished, as is the fall color. So if you can, especially if you live in a hotter climate, part shade is going to be kind of your sweet spot. Here in the north, you could easily grow it in full sun as long as it has sufficient water, because, again, this is not one of those very drought-tolerant plants. One last word I have to say, if you're thinking, hey, this plant sounds great and I definitely want to add it to my garden, it is slow growing and it's small. And those two things combine to make it a lot slower to produce than a lot of other plants like hydrangeas and that kind of stuff that you'll see on the market. So this plant has been out for a little while. We are always trying to increase numbers on it to meet the demand, because so many people, like Rick, do love this plant. But it is in fairly short supply. So if you're interested in it, don't sleep on it. Make sure that you pick it up and add it to your garden, because it will probably go, because there's not quite enough to go around, but we are working on it.
And to make sure to drive the point home, Stacy, so you are talking about Legend of the Small.
Yes.
There is also a Legend of the Fall.
Right, which was selected for superior fall color, even better than the standard from Fothergilla. And that one is kind of a more standard size, so more in like the 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 foot range. So two great choices. Legend of the Fall is much easier to find, but if you do want this smaller size in Legend of the Small, you might have to look for it just for a couple more years so we can get a little bit more out there on the market for you. If you'd like to add it to your garden, please visit provenwinnerscolorchoice.com to find a retailer. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're opening up the mailbag, so stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where it is our pleasure to help you with your gardening questions, quandaries, and conundrums. And boy, I tell you, our inbox is filling in fast. We only have time for a few questions every week, but we don't want to leave you hanging. So if you find yourself out there struggling with something, you don't know what to do, you can always reach out to provenwinnerscolorchoice.com. We have a contact form there. You can even attach a photo, and that will get you an answer in your inbox a lot sooner, and you don't have to wonder if we've actually, are going to answer it or anything like that. So we want to offer that service to you. Can't answer everything on air, or we wouldn't talk about anything else. We'd just be answering gardening questions all the time. But we do care about your success and want you to make sure that you have a good and stress-free spring. So please do take advantage of that if you would like. And in the meantime, we got some questions this week.
Yeah, Helga writes to us, I planted a new lawn last fall at my cabin west of Baldwin. This spring, I want to put down more seed, apply fertilizer, crabgrass preventer. What order should I do this? First more grass, then apply the fertilizer, or fertilizer, then plant grass? The property is north about 90 miles from Grand Rapids. What is the general timeline? So that's the point, timeline. It's based on soil temperature. So that's when annual weeds like crabgrass will germinate in the soil, usually when soil temperatures get to about 55 to 60 degrees. Stacy, a lot of people like to use a visual reminder, and that being the forsythias when they're in bloom. But really, technically, you should learn about growing degree days, GDD, as well as soil temperature. And universities like Michigan State University, it's a resource that I use, it's available to all, has a GDD tracker. And as a matter of fact, I took a look at it yesterday, and it's interesting. Stacy, every year is different.
Oh, for sure.
Last year, we were in optimum application time for crabgrass pre-emergent the end of March because of the temperatures had warmed up. We did not have as much snow in winter and ice. Whereas this year, we haven't even hit the optimum point yet. And we're going to be more normal this year, where usually the crabgrass controls are applied somewhere around between the first and third week of April. Tax day.
Tax day.
Tax day.
Good to know. Well, I think, Helga, that's all great information about timing, but the real key here to answering your question is you're asking, whether you put down the fertilizer, crabgrass preventer first and then the seed, or vice versa. And the thing that everybody needs to know about this question that makes it such a good question is that crabgrass preventer, the majority of crabgrass preventers, are simply pre-emergents. They prevent seed from germinating.
Correct.
So if you put down your grass seed and then put down the crabgrass pre-emergent, or even vice versa, your grass seed will not germinate. So it's not like it's specific to crabgrass. There are certain ones that might be, but overall, the majority of crabgrass preventers prevent grass from germinating, not crabgrass specifically.
That's exactly it.
So if I would recommend, so you kind of have a real issue here, a real quandary, because you're going to have this optimum time to put down your crabgrass pre-emergent, but you need to get that grass germinated and growing first. And you will see, if you look at some packages, and actually you don't even need to go to the garden center. If you just look at some brands' websites, you can find all of the package instructions right there on your computer or your phone and read what they say. Because it might say, for example, don't apply this within 15 days of having put down grass seed. So it will have some sort of, window of time where that is safe to do. And you're going to want to make sure you follow that exactly. So we haven't hit the window yet. You might be able to put down grass seed and get it germinating. If not, then I would say go ahead and put down your crabgrass pre-emergent, read that carefully to find out how long that's going to last, and then try to get your grass seed growing. But these two things are going to be difficult to time properly to make sure that it works.
The time to seed a lawn is in fall. That's the time to do it. So in spring, you're going to find with most pre-emergent controls, they're going to put down a barrier that lasts 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. So you can forget about seeding unless you buy a product specifically made for seeding. They're generally difficult to find and very expensive.
I would guess
very
the expensive part.
So
Helga, I think you're going to need to make a decision. Is it going to be grass seed, or is it going to be fertilizer and pre-emergent? Save the grass seed for fall, maybe.
That's what I would do.
Especially since you're not going to be, there all the time if it's your cabin. So timing, as in most cases, is everything.
Is everything. Joyce wrote to us about native plants for Michigan, an official list of native plants.
Yeah, so I thought this was such a great question because, I know that so many people out there are so interested in learning about native plants, growing more native plants, but you're kind of just like, where do I start? Mm-hmm. And the first thing I would say is decide how native you want to be. Like, are you going to be native to your county? Are you going to be native to your region of Michigan? Are you going to be native to the state, the peninsula? There's lots of different ways it can go. And that is a decision that each of us can make for ourselves. And then we are going to put a nice long list from Michigan State University of native plants in Michigan. But bear in mind that there are roughly estimated, because no one really knows for sure, but well over 600 different species of native plants to Michigan. And lists like the one that we're going to share in the show notes and in the YouTube caption there tend to focus on the species that are more commercially available. There's certainly a lot of plants out there that are native, but just don't necessarily have the appeal at garden centers where people are going to be, grabbing them up and wanting to plant them. So know that it's not going to be a comprehensive list, but it's going to be a good reference for you to know what to look for in garden centers. Now, a couple of other resources I have for you. We are lucky in Michigan. We have a couple of outstanding native plant nurseries. I personally have shopped at Wild Type out near Williamston multiple times. They're only open to the public a couple weekends a year. They have a great selection, but there's lots and lots of other ones. There's a wonderful one near Ann Arbor. The name escapes me at the moment. But, just search Michigan Native Plant Nurseries and see what you can find. Those would also be an excellent choice because you can trust that everything that they have there is going to be native, since that is their specialty.
And many garden centers and greenhouses have added a native plant section. And so, yes, I would do that research. I think you pointed out a really important thing, Stacy, as it relates to the state of Michigan, and that is you have to take a regional approach because you're going to find there's southern lower, there's northern lower, and then there's UP, and different climates, different soils. It's going to vary.
Yeah, you can split them up into many different sections. And then finally, I just wanted to mention there is a wonderful nationwide organization called Wild Ones, and they are dedicated to educating people about native plants. And the Grand Rapids chapter out here is very active. They do a ton of great work. So definitely take a look at them. They would be a great resource for joining together to learn about native plants and learning from each other. So take a look for your local Wild Ones chapter as well.
Going to hit this one real quick. Shelley wondering, absolutely love your show. Learn so much. Thank you. Gardening in West Michigan. Wondering what are the best annuals for full sun window boxes. And Stacy, I'll just throw a few out. The Star Diva Scaevolas, fabulous for hot weather. Meteor Shower, Diamond Frost, Lemon Coral Sea. I mean, there are so many that you can pick from, and I love the Mojave portulaca. I just think it's a great plant for house.
It is a great plant if you're retired and can see it open during the day, but that's one of those ones that closes up in the afternoon. Shelley, I think this is a great question because you said that, some of your window boxes in part sun have done better than your ones in full sun. And, window boxes, most of them are a relatively small volume of soil. So you definitely need to consider as you are, that plants can withstand not just the sun, but drying out more quickly and not having a really, big volume of soil around those roots. So you're looking for stuff that is very heat and drought tolerant. Now, I think that it's interesting, Shelley, that you in your own message mentioned the Stardiva Blue Scaevola, because that is the plant that actually started the Proven Winners brand. They had found it in Australia, where, of course, they need everything to be super sun and drought tolerant. And they were growing it in window boxes and hanging baskets and as a ground cover. And they were just like, hey, this plant can take it all. So that would be a great choice, I think, as well. Now, I will put some links in the show notes as well as in the caption on YouTube for some great sun-tolerant annuals. But a couple that I would add to that, I would say yes, geraniums. I would even say ivy geraniums, even though Rick does not like them, as we discovered. Sorry, Rick. But I would say yes to geraniums. Classic choice. Lantana. Now, that is a very heat and drought-tolerant plant. Perfect. And the cool thing about lantana is you can pick one that grows up or one that spreads, or mix them both together. So you just want to look at the plant tags to find one, depending on the look that you want. Sweet potato vine, another super sun and drought tolerant plant.
Truffula pink Gumphrina.
Oh, you love that one.
Oh, that thing, and it'll stand up to the heat. And what about Mini Vista Supertunias?
Yeah, all the Supertunias should do really great. I mean, they're not going to tolerate heat like in the south, but certainly the summers that we have in the Midwest and North, you won't have any trouble growing those all summer long. So we'll put some resources for you on the website at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Right now, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about our beloved spring ephemerals. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show as we continue our talk on spring ephemeral flowers. And Stacy, I have to say that bloodroot is one of my favorites. I have numerous pictures to share on the YouTube version of our show. But when that green scalloped foliage unfurls and then that white flower emerges, and of course the history of that plant, a native plant, bloodroot's one of my favorites.
It is so special. And, it is one of those ones, it does form large colonies. I haven't seen very many large colonies around here, but that's what I was talking about when I'm saying if you just see the trilliums from the highway and you never get in there to see, you'll miss things like bloodroot. And, the flower of bloodroot is pretty, but that foliage is just glorious. It's so pretty.
Yeah, I have a picture of it just emerging through the leaf litter. I'm with you on that. I think another thing you and I agree on, Stacy, and that is marsh marigold in the buttercup family, those bright yellow flowers when I'd be running on the trail and you get some of these low areas where it's wet, marsh marigolds jump out at you.
All right, so you're telling me that this is a marigold you can stand because it's not a true marigold.
Yes, it's not a true marigold. It's
so we found an exception from your plants that people
I love marsh marigold.
So marsh marigold is such a cheerful plant. It does grow in pretty much standing water.
Yep.
And so you'll often find it where you found skunk cabbage. Which is one of my favorites. Skunk cabbage is so special, such a unique plant. I know when I traveled to Australia, I was with my father-in-law and he had a colleague that lived there and he was taking us around and he said to me, "Oh, does skunk cabbage grow where you live?" And I was like, Yeah, and he was studying it as a materials scientist because it actually heats up the ground around it and melts the snow.
Generates its own heat.
So they don't bloom at the same time, but any place that you find skunk cabbage, it's really, really wet, muddy, standing water kind of soils, you will also find Keltha or marsh marigold a few weeks later.
And think about groggy, emerging pollinators and how important skunk cabbage would be to them.
Oh, yeah,
right?
for sure, especially flies.
Yeah. So there you go. As I mentioned in the first segment, I view some of the minor bulbs as a spring ephemeral in my yard. I love Anemone blanda.
Oh, me too.
Just such a beautiful tuberous rooted perennial. I have a picture to share with you that I took at Keukenhof Gardens in the Netherlands. This one's a tough one to pronounce. Keonodoxa. Some people call it Kyeonodoxa, but glory of the snow.
Yep.
Wow.
Very classic
Knocks
plant.
my socks off. As a matter of fact, I saw a great quote on the plant from an individual who lives in Minneapolis. It gets very cold in Minneapolis, folks. And this person said this plant will continue to grow come hell or high water or hard freeze.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Galanthus snowdrops. They're bell-shaped, milky white flowers offset by bright green markings. Love it. We've talked on this show before. I think we got a question on it. Winter aconite. One of the earliest bulbs to bloom in spring.
Definitely love that one. Also a very cheery yellow kind of rounded flower.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I know Adriana, I believe, likes Muscari grape hyacinth.
Yeah, she planted a bunch last year, so she's going to have a good display coming up into this year. I love them too, and there's such a diversity. You know, that's if you are just sticking to like the grocery store varieties of Muscari every fall, you know, and you love it, you owe it to yourself to get a catalog and order some of the specialty Muscaris like Valerie Finis, which is just the most glorious sky blue color. Oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful plant. There's so many cool ones out there.
Yeah, I go back to, again, Keukenhof Gardens in the Netherlands, and they create a blue river of Muscari grape hyacinths. But you're so right, Stacy, that some of the new varieties, and we have some pictures to share with you on YouTube, including the pure white ones. Not only the color is vivid, but just the shape of the flower. They're just unusual.
And they smell so good. Now, usually you don't get down there and smell them because they're so close to the ground, but they make good cut flowers for a little vase, and they do smell absolutely delicious. They kind of smell like grapes. They kind of have like that grape Kool-Aid smell. I don't know if it's departmental or, but yeah, that's kind of the vibe that I get from them.
What about Dutchman's breeches?
Oh, Rick, thank you for mentioning is it my all-time? I mean,
is it really?
I don't know if I can pick a favorite spring ephemeral, but Dutchman's breeches, Dicentra cucullaria, is easily one of my favorites. And there's a park out here in West Michigan that used to have the most breathtaking display of them. I mean, there was tens of thousands of them up this dune.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was something I looked forward to every year. And I have not seen it the last 3 years, and I believe that unfortunately what has happened is that the deer are eating the flowers. The plants are still there, but I've started hiking up there with my binoculars, and when I look with my binoculars, I see a lot of cut off stems. And so I think, unfortunately, my favorite display of them I have not seen, but a lot of people might think that it's called Dutchman's breeches and it's here in West Michigan and that's where it got its name. But no, these really do look like funny little pairs of pants flying off the stem. And it's just one of those plants that if you were to see a picture of it, like online or in a book or something like that, you'd go, whoa, that plant is so cool. I wonder if I could ever see it in real life. And it's like, no, you walk out your door and it's like growing a mile down the road.
Yeah, it's beautiful with the feathery
Oh, the
foliage.
foliage is so pretty.
Love it. And for folks keeping score at home, if you're watching or listening to our program in California or outside of the United States, in Canada, West Michigan is notorious for Dutch people.
Yes, that's true. Sorry.
A lot of us Dutch people here in West
I
Michigan.
guess I was assuming people would know that because of the Holland, Michigan movie that's getting so
There you
much
go.
publicity
Yeah,
these days.
That's
So-
right. That's right. Squirrel corn or Dicentra canadensis. Some
love
people would, Stacy, refer to it as bleeding hearts. But it is Dicentra canadensis, so you'll find this plant in Canada all the way down the East Coast in the United States. And, of course, the blooms are unique and beautiful.
Yeah, and so the foliage really looks very similar to the Dutchman's breeches.
Yes.
And you often find them growing in and around each other, which would make perhaps the uninitiated think like, whoa, was this some sort of mutation of the other? But they're two totally distinct species. And I love this. Do not dig one up, but so take my word for it or Google it. But the reason it's called squirrel corn is because the root does indeed look like a tiny little ear of corn with like little, like the bulblets on it look like little pieces of corn. It's a pretty amazing thing to see.
Very cool plant. How about Jack in the Pulpit?
Oh, I'm sorry. People are just going to be like, is there, there is no spring ephemeral that I hate. There's not a single one. I love them all, but Jack in the Pulpit is so special.
This one pops right out of a fairy tale.
Yeah.
You know, when I'd run on the trail, take pictures of it. It's just this unmistakable hooded, champagne fluted shaped cup, the pulpit, and then the slender stalk.
Yeah.
What a cool plant.
And now that is a plant, when we were talking, I mentioned briefly about the, Asian and North American floristic disjunction, the commonalities between them. Now, Asia got the lion's share of the Jack in the Pulpits. The Eracema species that are native to Asia will knock your socks off. They are stunning, amazing. Yeah. I mean, ours is pretty great, but theirs are like over the top.
So you got a good location or source for hepatica? Hepatica americana. Other people refer to it as liverwort or liver leaf. So a really dark leaf to it. Bluish flower, I think it has.
Yeah, so they can be blue, purpley, or white.
Yeah.
And that's another plant that I feel like when I moved here 14 years ago, I saw everywhere in the woods. And I feel like the populations have kind of disappeared. And I don't know if that's
I have difficulty finding it.
I don't know if that's an issue of the deer or, I think one thing that I've seen like around the Muskegon state parks is that I feel like the leaf litter is staying so much and suffocating them. Like it's not blowing away to kind of expose them.
Okay.
So I don't see nearly as many as I used to, but that is a gorgeous plant. That is also a very, very cool plant.
The trail that I would run had all kinds of wood anemone on it. So single flowers with, they're white flowers is what they are. The edges of the leaflets are kind of toothed. But very unique. And this is one that you would just see in drifts.
Yeah.
Love that wildflower and spring ephemeral. Wild columbine, right?
Love it. Absolutely love it. Definitely on the verge of like, is it ephemeral? Is it not?
Right.
Because the foliage does persist on that. And that kind of, I think, brings up the tail end of the ephemeral season because it starts to bloom sort of as everything else is going out. But that's another plant that if you were to just see a picture of this red and yellow flower that's just so intricate and so different, you'd be like, where can I see that? And it's like, oh yeah, in the woods. And once it's happy and it starts self-sowing, it's everywhere in a really kind and gentle way.
In drifts, just beautiful. Yeah, just beautiful. I got to hit on this one because I think I'm pretty sure it's a favorite of yours. While people in spring are killing these in droves in their lawn, you love violas and violets.
I do. And the lawn violet is one thing, but there are amazing native violets that we have. The bird's foot violet, the yellow violet. I do get very excited about those. You're absolutely right. I love them so much.
But I think it's a good thing to point out, Stacy, is that not all violets or violas or wild violets are created the same. There are oval-shaped leaves, toothed leaves, heart-shaped leaves. So there are. If you're interested in violets or interested in the spring ephemerals. Get to know them and do a little bit of research because they're not all created the same.
No, there's so much to see. So that's the main thing. Get to know them. Get out there and see them while you can because they don't last long.
So anything I can add to your list, Stacy, or did we hit them all?
The only one that I would add would be a very strange little creature that I did not encounter previously, but it grows pretty abundantly around here, and that is pedicularis. Also known as lousewort. It is a hemi or semi-parasitic plant, and it comes out with this really cool kind of like rosette of feathery foliage, and then the flowers come out and they're red and yellow and they're curved, and it's just such a unique plant. And it gets its nutrition partially from the tree roots that it grows on. So it's a very cool thing that you can see around here, especially on the lakeshore.
Interesting. And when you think about it, in early spring, trees pull a lot of water out of the ground. And so in early spring, again, these plants are taking the opportunity to do their thing, and we all benefit from it.
We sure do, and you should too.
You bet.
Get out there.
Fun show, Stacy. Thank you so much. Thank
you,
you, Adriana, and thanks most of all to you for watching or listening to our show. Have yourself a great week.